Greetings and welcome to Ghost Stories of Washington, Episode 6. Ghost Stories of Washington, Episode 6. We'll be reading a few short stories in this episode, included in Chapter 1, Haunted Houses, The Spirit's Gone, Battleground Ghosts, Keep on Keeping On, Memories Remain, Enduring Entity, Haunted House on Wheels. We begin tonight's adventure with The Spirit's Gone. Because I have not been able to personally contact the residents of this haunted house, I have chosen to use pseudonyms throughout the following ghost story. From the moment they moved into the house in 1968, and for the next 10 years, Pat and her middle-aged daughter, Diane, shared their Tacoma home with a phantom. The first ghostly encounter occurred when the doorbell rang empathetically at 4 a.m. Hearing loud noises in the dead of night can be a disturbing enough experience for anyone. But the fact that there was no doorbell in the house made the woman's experience even more frightening. It has also set stage for what was to come. Phantom knocks, scratching sounds at the door soon became almost routine. The master bedroom was of a good size, but Pat found she couldn't sleep in it. The light in the walk-in closet would switch on and off by itself in the middle of the night. The master bedroom was of a good size, but Pat found she couldn't sleep in it. On one occasion, Pat was so convinced that there was a real live intruder in her home that she called the police. She told them that she had seen the intruder's shadow on the basement wall as she looked down the stairs. The police searched the entire house, but did not find anyone or anything that shouldn't have been there. Such official word did not bring Pat much comfort. Over the next few weeks, she watched assorted cups and the cast iron lid to a pot fly across her kitchen as though propelled by an invisible force. At least she was able to find those objects when they weren't done moving about. Other items, kitchen towels, for example, would disappear completely before turning up as mysteriously some time later. The ghost wasn't always a nuisance, however. One family member locked himself out at night. The stranded man was afraid he was going to have to wake someone up to let him in. As it turned out, he merely knocked quietly, and once the door opened, he walked in, ready to thank whomever had shown him this kindness. But there was no one there, and he found the rest of the family asleep in their beds. Pat's bed figured prominently in one display of ghostly strength. While standing near her bed, Pat felt a small but strong hand push her. She fell into the bed. Signs of the haunting began to fade in the late 70s. Pat and the other members of her family met this change with mixed emotions. Well, on the one hand, they were relieved to be free of the spirits. On the other, they had realized that the ghost's presence in their home had made them feel protected and special. Despite the longevity of the haunting, no one could ever figure out for certain whose spirit had resided with the family in Tacoma. Whew, the spirit's gone. Hopefully you enjoyed that short one. Next, we have Battleground Ghosts. At least two houses in Battleground, Washington, and a third one nearby are haunted. The ghosts do not seem to be connected with one another. The following story concerns a building that has been converted from a commercial building to a residential duplex. The first tenants to rent the space as a home were a single mother named Betty and her two daughters. The little family was delighted to find such an inviting place to lease. The monthly rent was low, and both the building and the yard were spacious. Not long after moving in, the mother detected something very odd. Initially, she didn't suspect this abnormality had any paranormal connotations, but it was very odd just the same. She noticed that her daughters were extremely well behaved when they were in the house. It was as though they felt someone was watching them. The woman remembered thinking, whatever the cause, the result was something she enjoyed. The family's only complaint about their new rental house was that they would occasionally hear strange and inexplicable noises in the basement. The mother also became annoyed that no matter how frequently she closed the door to the basement, it would not stay closed. Betty never thought to contact the manager in the daughter's behavior with either the door to the basement or the sounds of her sometimes were heard down there. Then one evening, Betty found herself unnerved by her daughter Connie's peculiar movements while the child watched television. Every few minutes, the girl would look behind the couch she was sitting on, and then extended her gaze up to the ceiling. Puzzled, Betty asked her daughter what kept distracting her from the television show she was watching. Sounding surprised at her mother's question, the child answered in an obviously matter-of-fact manner. "I'm watching the people walking from the basement into our upstairs," she replied. "Can't you see them?" Children are often more able than adults to see the ghosts in their homes. Connie is now a grown woman, and she later recalled in an interview that she had been conscious of the spirits within the house from the start. That was why she always behaved as though there was company when she was in the house. She frequently watched the path of the apparitions as they proceeded from the basement to the upstairs level of the family home. One time she followed the specters and was startled to find out that they kept climbing even after they had reached the top stair. Every several months later, Betty learned what sort of business the building they were living in had been before it was converted to a duplex. It had been a funeral parlor. Connie wondered if the manifestations she had been seeing were the spirits of the dead departing this world. Whatever the explanation, Connie and her two well-behaved daughters enjoyed their stay in that particular haunted house. On to our next story. Keeping on. Some ghosts seem to be present only because they do not realize that they are dead. These souls go about their familiar routines as though they were still living. The following story is also from Battleground and is most likely an example of souls not realizing that their time in this realm has ended. The family routinely heard the front door of the house open, followed by the sound of footsteps making their way across the floor. One time, those phantom noises were even followed by the rustle of pages, as though someone was reading the newspaper. The sounds were so clear that the woman of her house presumed that her husband had come home. When she went to the living room to join him, she was quite startled to see that the room was empty. In typical haunted house fashion, the family would frequently find the small objects went missing for a few days at a time. Indeed, they became used to this and took it in stride. But when the unseen entity lay down beside their daughter on the bed, they were not able to accept that even so calmly. Some years later, that same daughter was attending a convention in Seattle when she struck up a conversation with a complete stranger. By strangest coincidence, the stranger had once lived in the same haunted house. Between the two of them, they were able to confirm each other's experiences. After further investigation, she and the family came to believe that they had learned the identity of their ghost. She was a teenager killed in a car accident. The girl had not led a happy life overall. The happiest times she had experienced had come while she was living in that house in Battleground. Once the family knew who the spirit was and were certain that she meant them no harm, they happily accepted their unusual house guest because this haunting seems to have the approval of all involved. It may go on for a very long time. In our next story, it is entitled Memories Remain. Another haunted house near Battleground is gone now, but the memories it gave three people who were children during the 1970s will linger in the subconscious to haunt them forever. The place appeared to be ordinary enough. It was a two-story home with the bedrooms on the upper floor. Roberta was a child of 10 when she, her sister, brother, and parents moved into the house. Her sister would never sleep in the room assigned to her, complaining that it was always cold. Roberta didn't have the same gripe about her room, but she was extremely distressed by reoccurring nightmares. The fact that the door to Roberta's clothes closet would never stay closed was not nearly as difficult for her to cope with as was trying to keep track of one particular doll in her collection. She'd find the toy in any number of different locations around the house, even though everyone in the family denied moving it. Worse, Roberta often had the feeling that the doll's eyes were following her, watching her. When Roberta was 12, the family moved on, no doubt much to the children's relief. The next family had a teenage daughter and son. The daughter soon suffered nightmares identical to Roberta's. Another time, the young woman and her brother stood in the bedroom that was once Roberta's and watched in horror as a figure appeared from within the closet. They ran from the room in terror, and was not until they were safely downstairs that either of them realized they must have run through the apparition in order to escape from the room. Not long after that incident, the house burned to the ground. Because no one was injured in the blaze, the spirits seemed to have left the property. The fire might be seen as having been a cleansing of sorts. And our next story is entitled Enduring Entity. When Rick bought the house in the southwestern town of Camas in the 1950s, he had no way of knowing it was haunted. He only knew that the house had been the pride and joy of the first owner, who had built the little place over a number of years, stretching from the late 20s to the early 30s. The first sign that anything was amiss, in retrospect, a very good indication that the house was haunted, electrical appliances would frequently malfunction, although all manner of investigation failed to turn up any problems. In frustration, Rick stripped out all of the original wiring and replaced it with new. Unfortunately, it appeared that he went to all that trouble for nothing, because the breakdowns not only continued, but actually occurred more frequently. Rick could barely get the evening newspaper read without the light flicking off. Appliances would function only intermittently, making cooking or even storing food a difficult chore. Rick eventually learned to accept the inconvenience and live in the house for many years before he sold it to a commercial developer. The company tore down the old house, but even that did not stop the ghost. It is said that the business now standing on that site tends to have inexplicable electrical problems. And then for our last story in this episode, Haunted House on Wheels. In 1983, Kurt Nelson bought a double-wide mobile home in the southwest Washington town of La Center, and at first he was delighted with his purchase. Kurt was convinced that he had struck a very fine real estate deal. Little did he know that he had bought a lot more than he bargained for. When tools he needed went missing, Kurt initially became annoyed. He soon found that the tools would eventually turn up again, just as mysteriously as they had disappeared. Conversely, when he tried to throw away an ordinary pen that had run out of ink, it kept reappearing on his desk. After this happened several times, Kurt lost patience. He took the pen out into the yard, dug a hole, and buried it. The next day, it was back on his desk. Once, when he was working outside, Kurt needed a particular shovel. He looked everywhere for it, even searching throughout the house. The shovel was nowhere to be found. As he was explaining to his son that the tool had been there one minute and gone the next, Kurt slapped his hand against the counter for emphasis. There on the counter was the shovel that had been missing. One day, Kurt walked into his kitchen and discovered that a bag of flour had been spilled on the floor. Instead of being scattered around the room in a mess, however, the white powder had been built up into a shape of a perfect pyramid. Soon after that incident, Kurt began to hear mysterious footprints throughout the trailer. By now, he knew for certain that the place was haunted, and so did his dog. The poor animal would not go inside, no matter how much coaxing Kurt gave him. In one rather amusing episode, the clothes dryer began to work all by itself. No one had turned it on because it had been broken for quite some time. Nevertheless, the appliance was giving off a considerable amount of heat, and the drum was rotating. A neighbor of Kurt's who knew something of the paranormal performed a ceremony at the trailer. When immediately afterward the dog happily came into the trailer, everyone knew the ritual had been a success. So unless you count the initial wear and tear on his nerves, it would seem that in fact Kurt did get a good buy on his trailer after all. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode and look forward to seeing you in our next one, which will start out with Man in the Closet. Take care. Have a great and wonderful, blessed night. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.